I have an email into them saying that it's not going to work. But that's why I was like, I was on earlier and then I'm like, hang on, what's going on? So that's sort of what happened. But yes, and I have travel has started here again, and so um, I'm traveling today, so that's just why it's been kind of all over the place. I'm not normally quite like this. Normally I have my things I'm doing and that's it.
Good. It's okay. So I am preparing the live now.
How are you?
I am great, thank you.
Good.
So, hi everyone, welcome to another online session. So today we are going to focus on a very important topic. It is related to mental health and the relationship between mental health and innovation. And I am happy to welcome Mandy. Uh, Mandy is going to maybe introduce herself a little bit, talk about. She's an author. She can talk about her books and articles, etc. So welcome to everyone, Academy Mandy, and I'm very excited to talk about this topic, as I said, because we need to make mental health a priority, especially in these stressful times. And because of the COVID and because of what is happening in the schools all over the world. So welcome again.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate you and appreciate you asking me to come in and talk about this topic because I agree, of course, it's really super important and it always has been super important, but it's gotten a little bit more brought to the forefront, I think, with the pandemic. And so my name is Mandy Freilich. Again, I am in Wisconsin in the US, and we have we're able to travel now and things, so that's actually where I'm on my way to currently, is to leave for travel. And so I apologize that I'm in my car, but I have um, written a couple books, all of them about either mental health or sort of, what teachers need in order to be innovative and divergent thinkers. And I started writing them before the pandemic because, like I said, this has been an always issue. This is not, teacher burnout, teacher attrition has been an always issue. And um, so I have those. And then I am a former elementary teacher. I was a technology integrator and then a director of innovation and technology. And I retired from that to consult full time. And so now I consult all over the place. It is such an amazingly fun job. I get to work with so many different people, so many different districts. And it's really just been sort of a highlight of my career. So it's something I really, really enjoy.
So Mandy, maybe we'll start with the first question. Do you think when people like to check, especially teachers, like to check their mental health, is it often related to some kind of social stigma?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I feel like in general, right? Like mental health issues are really uh, looked at as something that is wrong, and not only wrong, but detrimental to people around you, right? Because obviously, the way you act and the way you can feel is all of the people around you. So I think in general, they have, there's the social stigma. But with teachers, there's a little bit. It's almost like a heightened stigma attached to it because we are like we catalyst and the reason why kids do certain things that they do, right? Like the reason why they feel certain things. And because we're basically help raising kids, to have a mental health issue attached to that position is really, it can feel like we need to keep that under wraps even more than maybe a typical person would. And so because of that, I think for a very long time, it wasn't talked about. And if if it was talked about, if you did say you had anxiety, you did say you had depression, that would be looked at as, oh my gosh, can they continue in their job, or do we need to let them go? And so I definitely think that it is a struggle for people to open up and talk about those things, not only because of the stigma, but also just because of sort of that danger to their job, that comes with admitting something like that.
Yes. Okay. So, what are some of the tips you can offer to teachers uh, to be creative and especially during these days, and to maintain their mental health at the same time, not to, and to avoid juggle so many balls, which might lead to stress, anxiety, and mental health problems in general.
Sure. And I'll sort of give two different answers for this. So one of them is one of the most common questions I get is, how, as an administrator, can I support my teachers? That's a very common question that I get. And it's because, like, our administrators, the ones who ask those questions, they're good people. Like, they want to be able to support their teachers and how they're feeling. And here's the tricky thing about educator mental health. A lot of the work that has to happen at an individual level. So administrators can do things to support you. They can make sure that the things that are on your plate are necessary. They can make sure that they're respecting your boundaries. They can provide you with
Uh,
it start of how where you are. So a bit about how what do you do with your own emotions? Can you recognize when you start to burn out? Do you have did I lose you?
yes, I think there is something. You keep cutting. I think.
Okay, I apologize. Um, so I'll kind of start out with after I talked a little bit about the administrator stuff. Did you guys hear that?
Yes, a little bit.
Okay. All right. So, so the administrators can provide support. They can take things off your plate. They can give you information that you need to make good decisions. But ultimately, the healing from things like burnout, mental health, working on your anxiety and depression, and trying to find strategies to get that under control, really needs to come from the individual. And so that's why having, like, the necessity of healing within your profession can feel difficult, because it is something that has to start within you. But there are things that you can do to help yourself out. One is really just becoming aware of how self-aware you are. Doing the things to look up emotional intelligence, and start doing the things to build on your emotional intelligence. Do you have solid boundaries? Have you said, I am going to stop working at 4:30 at night, and you stop working at 4:30 at night? Or are you following those types of things? Because in most cases, what I've found is that when I've said to teachers, why are you working all hours of the night? They've said, well, my administration expects it. And I said, but have they ever said that to you? And the answer is usually no. So sometimes there's the perception that the administration asks teachers to do things that they're not actually asking them to do. And so really just double checking your own expectations, double checking your boundaries, making sure that you're building on that self-awareness.
Okay, sounds great. So, as an educational consultant, what you do for teachers in this regard? Do you often talk to them about their, or they talk to you about their classroom issues, about the challenges they face, or what exactly your role in this area?
Yeah, so I do a few things as far as the mental health districts. Typically it's a little bit more because I'm not a counselor. I'm not a licensed counselor. I had somebody reach out to me the other day and they were like, hey, do you do one-on-one sessions? And I'm like, nope, I do not do that because I am not a counselor. But instead what I do is I go into districts and I provide them with I provide teachers with information that they need to make good choices because this is one area that we traditionally don't talk about. So for example, I have a week-long stint coming up in a district in July where they are providing their teachers, they're bringing me out to provide their teachers a week's worth of workshops in order to help build their capacity in this area. So for example, I'm doing workshops on teacher engagement and disengagement, and I'm doing a self-care session. I'm doing some sessions on both adult SEL and SEL in the classroom. I'm doing sessions on belonging, so different things
Yeah.
like that. And so that's usually, typically what it is I go out and I do those types of sessions for districts.
Yes, this is great. So, what links can you, for example, show, or can you discuss that what links exist between creativity and mental health? Because often psychologists, mention that there are certain links between those two areas. Sometimes being creative can increase your positive emotions,
Mm-hmm.
can make you feel good about yourself, etc.
Yeah,
What are the other links you can mention or discuss about this,
sure.
about these two areas?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I'll sort of use it as, I'll try to give the example for me that always makes the most sense. So we have, and the pandemic I really think the pandemic has highlighted this issue of what's happened. And I think it's one of the reasons why teachers are so burnt out, actually. And that is that when you have a mental health issue that is drawing from your capacity to do other things, it makes things that feel extra that much harder because you just don't have the capacity to do them. And so when I say things that are extra, I'm talking about thinking innovatively. I'm talking about thinking creatively. I'm even in some cases talking about true collaboration. And so like there are some things that mental health issues like burnout, depression, anxiety, I'm just naming the most common ones, really hold people back from doing because when people have so much energy tied up in trying to get through their days with these mental health issues, it's much more difficult to have that energy to do extra. And so during the pandemic, what we've seen is we have seen the necessity to do both. And what I mean by that is we have seen the necessity for teachers to work twice as hard and to deal with their mental health issues of even if it's something as simple using air quotes here, as simple as fear because of the pandemic. We were asking them to both have those emotions and deal with those mental health issues and think creatively and innovatively. And that takes kind of digging into a well of capacity that you can only dig into for so long. It's like your extra capacity. It's like the over the top capacity to try to grab that much um, you know that much energy and brain power in order to do both of those things. And so it really is, when I go into districts, and sometimes, I've had administrators say to me, how do I make my teachers be more innovative? And I don't, first of all, I don't think you make anybody do anything, but I also think that when you talk about innovation, a lot of people want to say, well, they need more tech PD. I don't believe that's true. I actually think you need to look at how engaged your teachers are. How burnt out are they? How are they feeling? Do they even feel like they have the capacity to be creative or be innovative? Do they even have enough energy to put into something like that? And so that's really, for me, that's sort of what the connection is. We have a limited amount of everything between brain space and brain power and energy and all of these things in a day. And we don't have enough to sustain both mental health issues and innovative thinking.
Yes. Okay, great. So we often have this kind of habit, which is a bad habit. We often talk to ourselves as this little self-talk, which is negative.
Mm-hmm.
We keep getting those small negative voices,
Mm-hmm.
and I think most of teachers suffer from this.
Mm-hmm.
From this, I can say it's a terrible habit.
Yes.
It's not good.
Yeah,
What, what,
absolutely.
what advice or what techniques or maybe what strategies do you suggest for teachers who have this habit?
Yeah,
Yes,
that's a good question. And I think that almost everybody can relate to something like that, right? Like, you've had those moments where
yes,
you have thought about, oh, I just want to be better. Why do I stink at this? Or why am I so bad at this? Or why can't I do this faster, better, shorter, longer, whatever it is? Like, you want to be able to do something differently than you can do it. And I do think that there is definitely a difference between self-deprecation and understanding what your weaknesses are. And so a lot of times I find that people fall into that self-deprecation, which I have absolutely been guilty of doing as well. I have gone down the road of what I would call self-abuse in the way that I think and the way that I feel about myself. And that, for me, in dealing with my own mental health issues, is really like, that's a constant battle. That battle, I feel, doesn't end. But there are things that we can do to try to ward off some of those negative behaviors.
yes,
And one of the things that I love, if you're familiar with Brene Brown, one of the things that she says in Dare to Lead is, would you talk to a child the way you talk to yourself? Like, would you look at a child and say, you are so fat, you are so dumb, you can't do this? And of course, we would never do that, especially as educators. We would never do that. And so her point being, if you wouldn't say that to a child, why would you say it to yourself? And when I read that part of Dare to Lead, and I love Brown's stuff. I think she's brilliant. But when I read that piece of what she said, that made so much sense to me, because I have even four kids of my own. I would never talk to them that way. And so now when I start to think about myself in a really negative way, I will try to change the way I'm saying something. I've tried to, for example, instead of saying, oh, I need to lose weight, or I'm so fat, saying something like, um, I would love to get healthier. And it basically means the same thing, but you say it in just a little bit different way. And saying I would like to get healthier is a lot more positive than saying, oh, I'm so fat, or I'm so disappointed in my weight, or whatever it is. And so sometimes it's just reframing what it is that you're saying to yourself. There are some other things that you can do, of course, like you can practice gratitude. Gratitude is a fantastic practice for giving yourself a little bit more of a positive foundation to the way that your brain works, and mindfulness too. But I think reframing is a really great way to start some of those things. You know, even if you write it down and rewrite it in a new way, read it once a day, you know, and try to really make that kind of a habit.
So reframing is like putting things in other words, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah, it's really just about changing the words that you're using to talk. Yep.
instead of saying I am fat, I am ugly, say I'm great, I am beautiful.
Yeah, right. And you know, I think that one of the things I really had to grasp when I started working on the way that I was talking to myself is that I could both be happy with who I was and want to get better. And because I think sometimes we think in one or the other. We think we're either happy with the way we are or we want to get better. But it's not like that. You can be happy with who you are in a certain area and still want to improve, and that's okay. And so that was one, you know, that's one area I put a lot of work into because it is one that I struggle myself.
Great. So I see a lot of positivity from your side, which is which is good.
Good.
So the pandemic or the COVID-19 has certainly increased the anxiety levels in all the people, especially teachers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you think online learning will, in a sense, decrease this anxiety? And if so, how we can decrease this anxiety through online learning?
Well, so one of the things that, so I have, of course, my roots are in ed tech, right? And then my passion's always been in mental health. But one of the things that I work with districts on when I'm in the ed tech space is taking and helping them create online programs. I was doing that prior to the pandemic. Now, what everybody asks me for help for is taking their pandemic learning and turning it into a true online learning program. In many cases, at least in the US, one of the things that we were seeing was that a lot of the online learning was very synchronous. And there were, you know, teachers were getting on, they were on 7 hours a day, kids were on 7 hours a day, and they were all doing, you know, various forms of video chatting. And that's really, we like, I never want to say it's wrong because everybody did the absolute best they could with what they could when they could. And so I don't want to, I don't want to discredit anything anyone's done, but that's not really online learning according to the online learning best practices. And the reason I bring in best practices is because, you know, those types of practices are created for the best online learning experience for students, but they're also created to make online learning sustainable and for teachers, because the way that we were doing pandemic learning was not sustainable. Like nobody can be on a computer for 7 hours out of a day. That's not going to work. I mean, that's your you know, all of it's affecting all of the things from your eyesight to the way your brain works to all of, you know, all of that. And so I think if there's going to be a point where districts move to online, like true online learning programs, which I applaud any district that is. Like some districts have said, you know what, we need to create a program because we really did have students who were excelling in this type of environment. We need to give them that option. So that's awesome. But if they're going to do that, the way that the program is built is going to look very different, should look very different than it did in the pandemic. And if that's the case, then I feel like sort of a side benefit of that is going to be that teachers' anxiety levels lessen, because kind of going back to the, the best
Yes.
practices, those best practices were made to make the teaching sustainable. It was one of the reasons that we have those. And so if they do it correctly and they follow the true best practices for online teaching and learning, it's something where the teacher anxiety would be.
Yes, great. So I know that you have like written so many great books. I shared the link into the comment section. Can you talk about the fire within? What is it about?
Yeah, absolutely. So
I like the eye, which is an indicator of inspiration, creativity, everything. Is it a magic eye?
yeah, yes, yeah, sure, absolutely. It is so the fire within, the eye that's on the front was actually supposed to represent my story, which I have. If you ever see me in person, I've got blue eyes, and so it was supposed to kind of grab from that. But the Fire Within is a really interesting book to me. I love The Fire Within. Out of all of my books, it's probably my favorite. And because I didn't write the whole thing, I compiled it. So there's different stories in there. But I think the reason why I love it so much is because it was one of the first books on the market to really recognize some of the difficulties that teachers were going through even prior to the pandemic. And it recognized it in that way. But the other thing is that what I asked the contributors to do was to think about or talk about a time of their life where they experienced adversity and how they used, technically it's called post-traumatic growth, but how they used the growth or their learning from that experience, and they take that and use it with students. And the reason why I love what everybody in the book had done so much is because so often we look at the things that are difficult in our life, and we we sort of think, well, we don't want people to know that. We don't want people to see that dark side of us, or those dark things that happened, or maybe we're embarrassed, or we felt like we could have been more brave and we weren't. And so I wanted people to understand that lots of people go through adversity like that. Like you're not alone. And in that, there's so much power when you're able to take something from it and take that learning and do something wonderful with it, like be a better teacher for students. And I really wanted people to be able to see that, yes, adversity stinks when you're going through it. It is awful, it is terrible, and it hurts, and it's painful. But it doesn't have to be for nothing. We can take things from it, and we can do wonderful things with those things that we take. And so that's one of the reasons why I love Fire Within so much, is because the contributors that helped me write that book just did a fantastic job really getting that point across. And so there's that piece of the book, and then it is my first time that I start to talk about trauma, and I talk about post-traumatic growth, and we talk a little bit about mindfulness and stress and things like that. So that's kind of all in The Fire Within.
Okay, how you, Mandy, how you stay like healthy and good looking despite talking about these topics, post trauma, and very in a sense they takes so much from your energy, right?
Yeah, it really does take a lot to, I think the exit was right there. It really does take a lot to talk about these. It takes a lot to talk about these things in the way that I always feel like I'm in this catch-22 situation. I don't want people to resonate with what I say, because it means that they've felt something sad or they felt something difficult, or they felt something like that. So in one way, I don't want them to resonate with it. But on the flip side, I want to be there for people who do. And so it is, I I wouldn't want it any other way. I want to make sure that when I leave education or whatever happens, that if I left any kind of change, it's that I made anybody feel like they didn't have to feel bad about who they were or what they had experienced. And from that standpoint, it makes me feel so professionally fulfilled. That it's a happiness that I didn't have before I started doing this work. And so that is really kind of what keeps me going, I think.
Okay, yes. So you are thinking about the legacy that you are going to leave after when you when you are retired, something like this.
Have I
Great.
thought about what I'm doing when I'm here? Is that what you said?
I
Yeah.
said you are thinking about your
No,
legacy.
I wouldn't. Yeah, a little bit about, I guess, my legacy. I mean, I think we can only hope for a legacy, right? Like one of those things that I think you hope and pray for is to do something so, so important that you leave any kind of legacy. And so I think that, if I feel like if I have done that or if I do that, that's sort of my goal. And it's just to make people feel like whatever they've experienced as a human is okay.
Good. So what can you say about Reignite the Flames, finding our passion and purpose for learning, the second book?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have one book in between there. The book that's in between there is Divergent EDU.
Yes,
Divergent, yeah, Divergent EDU is kind of what you had said, but the question you had said before, like how do you link, teacher engagement, mental health, and innovation? Divergent EDU is really about supporting teachers. How can we best support teachers to be innovative thinkers? And so in part of that, I talk a little bit about teacher engagement and mental health and how that plays a role. So that's kind of Divergent EDU. And I wrote Divergent EDU and The Fire Within sort of in tandem. And so they were released very quickly, one right after the other. But Reignite the Flames is technically a follow-up to The Fire Within. And what it does is it takes examples and dives deeper into some of the reasons why teachers decide to either emotionally disengage from the profession or actually disengage and leave the profession. And so it talks about, so a lot of people say, well, I'm burnt out, I'm burnt out, I'm burnt out. And so it discusses that, nope, sometimes you're not burnt out. Sometimes that's not the problem. And so here are some other reasons why people leave the profession. It can be it can be because of demoralization. It can be because of different types of adversities. It can be because of things like teacher trauma, pandemics, a student that passes away would fall under teaching trauma. So there's, those pieces of it. There are other reasons why you may decide that you need to put your energy in a different place besides your profession, which ultimately sort of pulls you away from there unintentionally. And that's really what Reignite the Flames is about. It's about why teachers disengage, and then the second half of it is how can we re-engage? Like what are some of the steps that I took when 5 years in I wanted so badly to leave education I could barely stand it because I was so demoralized and so burnt out. And what were the steps that I took to come back? And I tried to really, it's heavily research referenced. I tried very hard to bring in research to all of that. So it wasn't just like, hey, read my story. It was, nope, this is actually how it's done. Like, this is how your brain reacts. This is how your body reacts. And so that's sort of what Reignite the Flames is about.
Great. So let's talk a little about self-compassion or self-care.
Sure.
Yes. What are some of the good practices you recommend for teachers to practice self-care and self-compassion, especially in these stressful times,
Yeah,
as you know.
just went over a big bump. So we have, so when I talk about teacher self-care, the thing that's interesting is like people are a little sick of hearing about self-care because I think it's the first thing everybody says, you know, when people say, oh, I'm feeling down, I'm feeling burnt out, I'm feeling bad. The first thing somebody tries to fix that with is they're like, oh, have you practiced self-care? And now nobody wants to hear the word self-care. So I think that one of the, I think, most important things, I'm sorry, hang on one second.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm fortunate enough to have my son driving me to the airport, and so I have to try and give him directions as we go. But I think one of the most important things to understand about self-care is that it is scientifically proven to improve or to help burnout and all of those different things. And so when we talk about teacher self-care, it's not that we're using it as an excuse or a fix-all. It's that it actually is something that helps in order to get, you know, like reduce your chances of getting burnout and all of those types of things. And so I think that from that standpoint, it's a really interesting reason to, you know, to make sure that when somebody mentions self-care, that you just sort of let go of your, I don't want to hear about self-care anymore thing, and just keep in mind that it is something that can actually help you. And so you're gonna have to go that way. And so the piece of that self-care that I usually hit on is that there really is actually 4 types of self-care that I've defined. And I think that like one of those is going to be intellectual self-care. So that's really about taking, you know, taking care of your brain. One of those is going to be emotional self-care. That's doing things like, you know, learning to forgive other people, for example, and self-compassion and taking care of yourself. Um, it's there's physical self-care, so that's the one that usually people are, you know, like if you're a runner, you're really good at taking care of yourself physically. You do that a lot. So there's physical self-care, and then there's spiritual self-care. And spiritual self-care is interesting to me because a lot of times people say, well, I can't practice spiritual self-care because I am not religious. And being religious and being spiritual are 2 totally different things. And not totally different things, like they overlap, but you don't have to be religious in order to be spiritual. And so spiritual self-care would be things like anything that you can do to really take care of your soul. You know, are you are you, why don't you just park in here? Are you you know, practicing mindfulness? Are you you know, practicing gratitude? Are you doing some of those things that just make you feel good on a soul level? That's really what spiritual self-care is. And so a lot of times, kind of an activity that I do with people is I ask them to write those 4 down, and then without explaining what they are, I just ask them to you know, sort of make a list of all of the things that they do with that are self-care. And then we go through what each of those 4 quadrants are, and they have to take their list of things that they do for self-care and put them in those 4 quadrants. And typically what they find is that there's one of the quadrants that they don't pay any attention to. So for example, when I first did this, I noticed that spiritual self-care was something that I was really lacking. And when I started to practice mindfulness and meditation and doing some of those spiritual things, communing with nature, I noticed a huge difference in my happiness level. And so, you know, from the self-care perspective, self-care is more than, I had somebody refer to self-care the other day as getting your nails done and going to the spa. It's so much more than that. It's so much more than that. It's doing the hard work on yourself emotionally. It's making sure that you understand your triggers for things like anxiety or depression or stress or whatever. It's really about understanding yourself better so you can take care of yourself better. And And so I think that from that standpoint, that's also how you're showing yourself compassion. That's how you improve the way you talk to yourself. And in return, that's how you improve the way you treat everybody else.
Yes, I just want to remind our audience that it was a little urgent for Mandy to do this podcast on the car
I'm so sorry.
because of some urgent situation, but it was okay.
Yeah, no, I apologize for having to be in the car, that's for sure.
Okay, so Mandy, do you have any future project related to this area of mental health?
Well, right now I don't have any. I've been working on building a course that's going to basically go through some of the things that I talk about in my mental health sessions. I have I also have a free, this isn't a future project, but just so everyone knows, I do have a free educator self-care course that you can find on my website. It will always be free. You never have to pay for it. And so you can, if you go to my website, www.divergent.edu, you can absolutely go ahead and sign up for that course, and it'll go through it'll go deeper into some of the self-care stuff that I just talked about. But I have been thinking about creating a mental health course for districts, and then really it's about going out and
That's a great idea.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
I really love to go out and have conversations with these people, because one thing that's sort of been brought to my attention over the pandemic is that in order to have really good mental health conversations, they really do need to be in person. It's so much better in person when you can have those conversations. And so, right now I'm just working on making sure that when I go out to a district and I do workshops or whatever it is, that they are the best, the best workshops that I can possibly put people through to be the most helpful. So that has sort of been the the thing that I'm working on right now.
Good. So do you find it easy when you write books? Is it challenging for you, or is it just it is a piece of cake?
No, it's definitely not a piece of cake. I'm the type of author that I always say, I'm the type of author that proves that anybody can be an author, because
Really?
I had to work really, really hard on my writing. I am not a natural writer. And so just the fact I was never one of those people that grew up and thought, oh, I want to write a book one day. Nope, I had no desire to do that, because I was not a very good writer. And so in order to get to the point where I could write a book, I had to write and practice a lot. And that's really one role that my blog has taken, is sort of that practicing my writing on other people and allowing them to critique it for free. And when
That's a nice strategy.
Yeah, that was a strategy I tried. So but I had to work really hard at it. And so when people say to me, well, I'm not a very good writer, I always say, like, nor I had to practice so much to get to the point to be able to write a book. And so I don't know if I would say I find it difficult necessarily, but to get to the point where I could write a book was probably the more difficult part. Being able to practice enough to get good enough to do something like that.
Yes, I think when you start writing in a blog, it makes things a lot easier.
Yeah.
Because as you said, you get comments and criticism from people for free, and you work on yourself.
Yep, absolutely.
So I have a couple of questions on writing. Do you think writing is therapeutic? Do you think writing can make people feel better about themselves? Can make them release those negative emotions?
Yeah, so I have actually a really good story about this. I did use the blog to help me get better at writing, but I also use a blog very much as like a reflection tool, as being able to reflect on different things that were happening in education and happening in my life and connections I was making. Like that was a big deal to me to be able to do that in my blog. And I found over time that one of the things that writing on my blog did for me was it allowed me to get things out of my headspace. So I always kind of picture my head as being this room. And if I have way too much packed in that room, there's not a lot of creative stuff happening. Like there's just way too much in the room. And what blogging did was it allowed me to take some of those thoughts that were constantly floating around in my head, and I had to process through them enough to get them onto, like a blog post, and which made me think about them, which made me toss them around in my head until they made a little bit more sense. And once I was able to write it down, it sort of got it out of my headspace, and I didn't really have to think about it anymore. If I wanted to, I could go back to my blog post and reread what I was thinking and expand on there, but I didn't have to keep it in my head. And that's one really powerful way that blogging has worked for me. As far as being therapeutic as well, when I wrote The Fire Within, the contributors that I had shared very, very personal stories of adversity. So the adversity that they shared wasn't necessarily work related. It wasn't necessarily professionally related. And so there are some, like very powerful stories in The Fire Within. And what I found in working with the contributors was that they would come to me and they would say, I'm struggling because I'm writing this story. Like one of them had to actually go back into therapy because of everything the story was bringing up. They were having to, they didn't know when they were giving too much detail of really terrible things that happened. And so what I ended up telling them was, write it all down, write everything down, and take that and crumple it up and throw it in the fire. Start again, and then write your story. And I would say more than half of the contributors I worked with in that way, and every single one of them came back to me and said, we're really proud we wrote for The Fire Within. But better than that is that writing that story was the best therapy we have ever had. Like being able to get that out onto paper, to throw it away, to try and get it, out of our own headspace, to try to move forward and heal from that. That was one of the most powerful experiences of our life. So from that standpoint, when I talk about writing and I talk about healing, that's always one of the things that I recommend that I've seen work for other people, is that, to write your story down, and write everything down. Your feelings, your thoughts, the terrible things that happened in just the way you remember them, crumple it up, throw it in the fire, light it on fire, however you have to do that. And from that way, I think that writing can be very therapeutic.
So it has to be fire, not something else like buried.
I guess you could bury it. I feel like if you set it on fire, then it kind of blows away in the wind. But if you bury it, it's like still there.
Oh yes.
One
day you will pass from this and you will discover them or something.
Yeah, right. So
yes, great.
yeah. So I think I do think writing can be very therapeutic.
So that was a very great discussion with you, Mandy. So I'm really excited to meet and learn from you.
Yeah.
Do you have any final comments maybe to our audience in Everyone Academy?
Well, I do want to say, first of all, again, I am so incredibly sorry for being in the car. I think that I probably, if I was watching my video, I probably would have been sick, like from all the bouncing and everything else. So I apologize for that. And I hope that you still were able to glean some information out of what I said. And from as far as sort of some final comments, I do want to say something I've said, I've said it before, but I'll say it 100 times more. I've never been more proud to be in the education profession as I have been since this pandemic started, and to see what educators all over the world have done in order to make sure that other people's children are succeeding and are happy and are doing the best that they can. And so, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for everything that you've done in your classrooms all over the world. And if there's any additional questions I can answer, either put them in the chat or where you're putting them right now, or if you want to go to my website, you can absolutely ask me on there too and continue the conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. I will definitely invite you in the future. This is a great topic.
Oh, we need to do it at some point when I'm like sitting looking at you, not in a car.
Yes, I will definitely invite you in the future, because this is a great topic, mental health and psychology, and it is a great topic, and we'll see a time in the future and invite you to share more ideas with teachers.
Absolutely, I would love that. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, and drive safely.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.